Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Jones. I'm the Climate Services Lead and one of the forecasters here at the National Weather Service office in Bismarck. With me is Corey King, our Emergency Response Specialist. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the upcoming winter, the outlook and the expectations. We timed this webinar pretty well because the official winter outlook was just released this morning, so we've got a lot of brand new information for you. But before we get into that, Corey is going to do some housekeeping for us real quick.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of put some of the rules of engagement out there on the webinar, just so you know what to kind of expect here. Right now, we're starting the webinar with everybody muted. So at the end of the webinar, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And what we'll do is if you put your hand up or even put one into the question box, we'll go ahead and answer it in the question box. We can do that one. But if you want to speak, put your hand up and then we'll unmute you, but you'll probably have to unmute yourself as well. So just kind of be aware of that. So sometimes that's a kind of a gotcha for folks. So again, we're going to wait until we get to the questions at the end here. We might try to keep that organized. We might go with our emergency management partners first for their questions and then kind of wait for any of our media partners right after that. So one of the things that we know people are already talking about is this potential storm for the weekend, right, Megan? So what we thought we would do before we even get into the winter outlook is just go ahead and address some of those potential questions right from the get-go here. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Megan and let her talk about the upcoming storm and then what else to potentially expect for the winter.
Thank you, Corey. So yes, the upcoming winter weather potential. This is looking at next Sunday and Monday, and confidence is increasing that during this period, it's going to be colder and wetter. This could be the most significant rainfall we've had in the past 2 months. Right now, we're looking at an 80% chance of rain. It has been very dry the past 2 months, so really any sort of precipitation will be definitely welcome. This also could be the first accumulating snowfall of the season for some locations, especially for you folks in the west and north. Looking at right now a 30% chance for at least 1 inch of snow. Obviously, a lot could change between now and Sunday and Monday, so be sure to stay up to date with the forecast at weather.gov/biz. We are here 24/7 to answer any questions you may have. So you can check our website and also our Facebook and Twitter for any sort of updates that we have. So kind of switching gears to more of what we were originally talking about with this webinar. So we're looking ahead to the 2022-2023 winter, and the official Climate Prediction Center winter outlook was just released this morning, so this is hot off the press. Of course, I should lead with when we say winter, people are mainly talking about the December, January, February season, meteorological winter. We know, of course, that North Dakota winter is going a lot later than this, so we'll be talking about additional seasons as well. But these are the seasonal temperature and precipitation outlooks for the December, January, February period. Over here on the left is the temperature outlook. You can see this blue shading across all of North Dakota. That means that the temperatures, the probability is leaning for below normal. So below normal temperatures are favored for the winter season. This is not too much of a surprise as we are in yet another La Nina winter. This is the third La Nina winter in a row, and we'll be talking a lot about that throughout this presentation. What was interesting is in this seasonal precipitation outlook, last year we were mainly just in this equal chances category, but now this year, for December, January, February, we do have kind of this little portion of North Dakota in this leaning above for above normal precipitation. Again, it's not very strong. It's in this 33 to 40% category, but is maybe a little bit of an indication of above normal precipitation possible. The rest of the state is in this equal chances category, which means that there is an equal chance for above, below, or near normal precipitation. Basically means that when we're looking at all the guidance, when these forecasters from the Climate Prediction Center they're not really seeing any strong enough trend to put us in one category or the other. So continuing on to the next season, this is the January, February, March seasonal outlook. So the same things we just looked at, just a different 3-month period. Again, we have these below normal temperatures favored across North Dakota, which is not too surprising. But what I really wanted to focus on is a much more widespread chance for above normal precipitation, even getting in the northwest corner into this 40 to 50% category. So again, leaning above, Not the strongest of trends, but it's certainly a stronger trend than the equal chance. So these forecasters at the Climate Prediction Center are seeing some signal for above normal precipitation later in the winter and into the start of the spring season. We then look to the February, March, April outlook. Our temperature outlook over here on the left, again, still leaning below normal. So increasing confidence that we're going to have below normal temperatures through the winter and into a big portion of the spring season, which certainly has implications. And then we go back to our precipitation outlook. The trend has weakened a bit, so we're back into that equal chances category for February, March, April, which again doesn't mean near normal. It just means that anything is possible above normal, below normal, or near normal precipitation for this season. So I mentioned that we're in a La Nina right now, the third of back-to-back-to-back La Ninas. But before I talk about what a La Nina is, I need to talk about what ENSO is. And ENSO is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We call it ENSO for short. And really, this is just a very large-scale climate pattern that's based on sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. And basically, these sea surface temperatures are interacting with the atmosphere to create this really large-scale pattern. And there are two phases of this oscillation. There is El Nino, which is the warm phase, so sea surface temperature anomalies in a specific region of the Pacific Ocean are above normal. And then the La Nina, which is the cold phase that we are in right now for the third winter in a row, means that those sea surface temperature anomalies are below normal. It's a very large-scale climate feature. This really has global implications, and it's also something that we're very reliant on for our seasonal outlooks because we have much more predictability and skill with this compared to other teleconnections. So we have a La Nina advisory in effect. Like I said, we are in the cold phase of this oscillation, and these conditions are occurring and are expected to continue through at least most of the winter. So a little bit different than last year, and I'll get to that in a minute. But what does this mean for the upcoming winter in North Dakota? We're talking about sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, and North Dakota is nowhere near the Pacific Ocean. So how does this have anything to do with our winter season? What we see during a typical La Nina is, we've got this ocean and atmosphere interaction, and this circulation is leading to a blocking high pressure in the North Pacific Ocean. This leads to a more variable polar jet stream that kind of arcs up into Alaska and Canada, and then works to bring colder air down into the north central United States more frequently than normal. So this does favor colder than average temperatures for North Dakota. It's been a little bit more inconsistent since about 1990, but it still is a relatively strong trend when we're thinking about long-range guidance. We are expecting La Nina to peak in intensity this winter, and then probabilistic forecasts are showing a transition to ENSO neutral, which is again different than last year. Last year we were very confident that the La Nina was going to continue through the entire winter season, but now we're starting to bring up, maybe a transition back to ENSO neutral conditions. So then, of course, the question is, what is an ENSO neutral? So we talked about ENSO having this warm phase and this cool phase, but ENSO neutral means that it's just not in either one of those phases. It means that the sea surface temperature anomalies are pretty close to normal. So we're just kind of in this phase where you can't really get a whole lot of information from the ENSO state because it's in its pretty baseline state. And I will say that the atmospheric setup of an ENSO neutral is similar to what it looks like during a La Nina, but it is much weaker. So of course, if we don't have an ENSO phase going on, if we're just in this ENSO neutral, we do become dependent on other shorter term climate features that we're seeing on the scale of 2 to 4 weeks, which is certainly harder to think about when you're thinking about the winter season as a whole, and especially getting into the late winter and early spring. 2 to 4 weeks is a much shorter time frame than what we're looking at right now. Over here on the left is the probabilistic ENSO forecast. These blue bars you see are the forecast probability for a La Nina. You can see that right now for September, October, November, we are at 100% because the La Nina is ongoing. You can see as we progress through the seasons that blue bar gets shorter as the probability gets lower, before eventually in the February, March, April season, the ENSO neutral probability, which is this gray bar, does become higher than La Nina. They're pretty close, but it is a little bit higher. So the current expectation is for some sort of transition during the February, March, April season into the March, April, May season, which is meteorological spring. And you can see then in that season that the ENSO-neutral forecast probability becomes much higher, and the La Nina forecast probability becomes much lower. So thinking about this transition from a La Nina to an ENSO-neutral, and really what that's going to mean for our winter season, I went back and looked at years with a transition from La Nina to ENSO-neutral during kind of that late winter, early spring. And what was interesting to find is that although the snowfall for the pure meteorological winter season was pretty variable, ranging all the way from 12.1 inches to 43.9 inches, if you look at the total season snow, that gives you a much more coherent range of about 45 to 65 inches for the total season snowfall at Bismarck. I didn't look at our other main climate sites. This is just for Bismarck. That certainly gives us kind of a general range, with our average being 50.5. So this is, near normal to slightly above normal, which does fit with the Climate Prediction Center outlooks of slightly favored for above normal precipitation, especially later on into the winter and into the early spring. So the typical La Nina impacts, so these are anomaly plots for temperatures. Over here on the left, we do have the October-November temperature anomalies for all La Ninas. One of the things that we typically see in the fall ahead of a La Nina winter is it is pretty mild, which is nice. It hasn't been too bad this fall yet, although as we are talking about winter precipitation coming up potentially on Sunday and Monday, that's kind of flipping things a little bit. And I will say that when we look at moderate La Ninas, which is what we're in right now, that trend is a little bit weaker. So maybe not quite as strong of a signal for mild per se for the rest of October and into November. Maybe closer to near normal, but certainly not too much of a cold spell expected for the remainder of the fall. Then we look into December, January, February temperature anomalies. Again, this is for all La Ninas. You can see that it is pretty consistent across the entire north central US that we get these cold anomalies for all La Ninas, which again is what we're expecting based on the more variable polar jet stream. It's not a given, but it's certainly a pretty good guess given the atmospheric setup. Of course, everyone always wants to know about snowfall, and La Nina unfortunately does not have too strong of an influence on precipitation. We are looking at the trends and seeing an increase of precipitation because of that. So you see over here on the left, the composite for La Nina anomalies, really not much coloring in the state, so not much of a signal either way. But we do start to see some positive anomalies just looking at the trend in the central part of this figure. So then on the right, when we look at the composite and the trend, that is mainly just coming from the trend. We talked about getting new climate normals last year. Hopefully you all are aware of that, and we did have increasing precipitation at our main climate sites. So again, the trend is just for more precipitation, but that might not be, it's not expected to be just from the La Nina. There are certain snowfall patterns during La Nina depending on the strength, which is an interesting thing to look at. So over here on the right, we have the average snowfall patterns for weak La Nina years. And then over here on the left, we have the average snowfall pattern for strong La Nina years. I said that right now we are in a moderate La Nina. This is expected to weaken into a weak La Nina before eventually transitioning to an ENSO-neutral. We're not expecting it to be a strong La Nina, so we can kind of ignore this figure over here on the right and focus more on the figure on the left. You can see that during weak La Nina years, there is a decent signal across the entire Northern Plains region for above average seasonal snowfall. So again, this kind of fits with what we were looking at in the table with the years where we transitioned from a weak La Nina to ENSO-neutral, maybe being near to slightly above normal. And it also fits with the outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, slightly favoring above average precipitation, especially in the January, February, March season. So there are a lot of other things that can play a factor, and I won't get into all these in details, but just know that there are a lot of different oscillations and climate modes and features and events that we're going to be looking at throughout the winter season. But again, unfortunately, these have a pretty short predictability, generally on that 2 to 4 week time scale. So if we're looking right now, we're not going to know what the Arctic Oscillation is doing in January because it's just too far out. So these are things that we will be paying attention to, and if we see any sort of strong trend, we will certainly let you all know what we're thinking, especially for the winter. We can start to see evidence of some cold snaps coming. So if we start to see a strong signal of that, we will definitely let you know. One of the oscillations I did want to quickly talk about is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which I won't get into the background of the details of that, but there has been some local research done by our hydrologist, Alan Schlog, and also two former forecasters, Kevin Burke and Patrick Ide. And they were looking at our springtime flooding risk, as it was, a project involving our hydrologist. And they really wanted to see if there was anything they could figure out about when we typically have, these bad, I mean cold and wet winters and springs. And they found that historically, when we have these bad winters and springs, there is both a La Nina and a negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And that is what we have right now. We are in a La Nina, and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation is in its negative phase. Now, I do want to say this doesn't guarantee anything. Not every La Nina and negative PDO will bring a bad winter and spring, but the majority of the time when we have those bad winters and spring seasons, that is during a La Nina and a negative PDO. So again, it does not guarantee anything in regards to wintertime precipitation and springtime flooding. They did find that a lot of the times, this led to a higher peak in the springtime flooding and a little bit later of springtime flooding peaks as well. So that is certainly something that we're going to be paying attention to through the winter, and especially as we get into the new calendar year and get a little bit better of a feel for the spring. So again, not saying that we're going to have any springtime flooding issues, but it is something that we thought was interesting and was worth sharing with all of you. So again, we will just be keeping an eye on these things, and we'll let you know if we have any updates. I thought these were interesting to share. These figures are from Brian Bretschneider from Alaska Region Headquarters. So last year we talked about the second of back-to-back La Ninas and what that meant. Now we're talking about the third of back-to-back La Ninas. This doesn't happen very often, so we don't have a lot to compare it to. But it is interesting to see that, again, every La Nina is going to be different. And we certainly see that looking at these bottom two figures. These are the official triple dip La Ninas. The ENSO record starts in 1950. So the first one was in 1975 and 1976. You can see that there is a very prominent warm signal across North Dakota and really much of the continental U.S. With these very strong positive temperature anomalies. On the opposite, the other one on the official record is in 2000 to 2001. You can see that it's completely opposite, and there's a very strong cold anomaly across North Dakota and the central U.S. So that doesn't help us out too much, really not much of a trend we can gather from that, especially only two official triple dip La Ninas, and one was very warm and one was very cold. Of course, it is interesting to look at what was on the unofficial record. So before 1950, we do have some concerns with data quality and things like that, but still interesting to look at that in 1910 and 1911, we were mostly cold across North Dakota, although spatially it was not very large across the northern part of the U.S. And then in 1917, 1918 was probably the strongest cold anomaly across North Dakota and much of the central and eastern U.S. So looking at the same things for precipitation, again, there's only two official triple dip La Ninas to compare to. Doesn't tell us a whole lot. Down here in the bottom left in 1975 and 1976, you can see there's a little bit of a wet anomaly, especially across the far northern part of North Dakota. In comparison, 2000 to 2001, it was dry across most of North Dakota, although it was interesting to see that throughout the rest of the region, there was a pretty pronounced wet signal, especially across South Dakota. 1975 was the very warm La Nina, and 2000-2001 was the very cold La Nina. So again, can't gather a whole lot from that. They ended up being pretty opposite, which again just reinforces the point that although we have a pretty good guess as to what's going to happen in a La Nina, that's not always going to be the case. And again, for our two unofficial triple dip La Ninas, 1910, 1911 was wet across most of North Dakota. And then in 17 and 18, the state was pretty split with wetter conditions in the west and drier conditions in the east. Of course, again, talking about the differences in La Ninas, the last two winters have been very, very different, even though both were La Niñas. The winter of 2020 to 2021, I'm sure most people remember because not only was it very warm in December and January, it was also very dry. Bismarck ended up with only 16.7 inches of snow on the season, which certainly did not help drought conditions going into that summer. Then if we look at the next year in comparison, so this was last winter, it certainly was more of what we were expecting with cold anomalies across most of North Dakota, except for the Southwest. So again, not maybe as widespread as we were thinking. The coldest anomalies were in northern Minnesota, but again, it was much more of what we were expecting for a La Nina. And again, this is more of what we were expecting this year, kind of similar temperatures to last year. What was interesting though is that as we get kind of further into the winter and into the spring season, become a little bit more confident in those colder than normal temperatures. So over here on the left is the continuation of the winter of 2020 to 2021. You can see we did end up below normal in the western half of North Dakota, neutral to maybe a little bit warmer in the eastern half. So again, not a super widespread signal, but it was more than what we were seeing in the traditional winter season in terms of cold anomalies. And then in February to April 2022, so this past season, especially ending in April, I think we all know what happened there. We did end up colder than normal across the entire North Dakota area and really the surrounding region. So much more of what we were expecting. So just to put this into perspective, over here on the left is the average season snowfall across North Dakota. You can see we've got some areas, especially in the north and kind of the Devil's Lake Basin area in that 50 to 55 inch range. Otherwise, a good portion of the state is kind of 40 to 50, some areas a little bit lower, some areas a little bit higher. But that's our average season snowfall, just to kind of give you a number to work with. This is what we ended up with last season over here on the right. This is the 2021 to 2022 total season snowfall. And some places did end up pretty high. And again, these are just interpolated maps, so surely it's not going to be spot on in every location. This area up here in north central North Dakota did end up in that 80 to 100 inch range. Otherwise, a lot of places in this dark green in this 60 to 80, and then kind of lesser amounts far west into the south. But again, a lot of that really did come in April. I know before April, Bismarck was running about a foot below average for seasonal snow. So it really doesn't take much. Sometimes we can be running below average for a while and suddenly just flip and we get tons of snowfall in a very short amount of time. So that is the difficulty in predicting seasonal snowfall, is sometimes it comes all at once and sometimes it is very steady throughout the entire winter season. So just to kind of summarize all of that and what exactly we're expecting. For temperatures, we are expecting near normal temperatures through the rest of the fall. We could get some variation in there, but overall expecting near normal. Transitioning during the month of December, kind of settling into that colder weather that we are really expecting, and then normal to below normal temperatures January through April. That fits with the kind of La Nina pattern that we see. Also, we know from the updated climate normals that came out last year that the spring season is cooling. So that combined with the La Nina is having us expect that cold is really going to linger into a good portion of the spring season. For precipitation, we actually have some signals this year, which is nice. A signal for above normal precipitation, especially in that January, February, March season. And again, when we're looking at previous winter seasons that transition out of a La Nina into ENSO neutral, we're expecting near to slightly above normal snowfall. So for Bismarck, we're estimating that 45 to 65 inch range, and then slightly higher amounts to the north, especially where they have a little bit more of a trend for above normal precipitation. We are also expecting the second half of winter into the spring season to be the more active pattern. That again is coming from the Climate Prediction Center outlooks, some extended guidance, the La Nina transitioning more into a weak La Nina, and also just new climate normals that are showing that we get a little bit more precipitation then. So all those factors, more active second half of winter into the spring season, and then also cold January through April. So things to remember, like I've said, every La Nina is going to be different, especially there are some uncertainties with this transition back to ENSO neutral conditions. That happens earlier than expected, later than expected. that could certainly have an impact on things. Of course, our weather is going to swing from one extreme to the other. Just because temperatures are favored to be below normal does not mean that we're not going to have mild periods, but it also means that, if we have a mild period, we will probably average out with a very cold period like we typically see at least once during the North Dakota winter. And of course, again, it's very hard to summarize precipitation on a seasonal scale because we could have frequent low impact events and kind of have a steady winter season, or it could be pretty quiet and we really only have a few high impact events. We can get to our seasonal snowfall total in a variety of ways. So some bonus content, drought. I was really hoping to not have to talk about this again this year. I remember we talked about it last year and we're really hoping for some precipitation that we ended up getting in April. So we'll have to see how things turn out again this year, but you can see this is the latest drought monitor. We do have a good area of D2, which is severe drought out in western North Dakota, and then a little bit in the central, and then a little bit in the southeast. And then the majority of the rest of the state is in D1 moderate drought. So of course, that is something we'll be keeping an eye on. Any precipitation is going to help with drought conditions. We're really going to be paying attention to getting a normal to above normal snowpack in the late winter and spring. That way we get that beneficial runoff and we can replenish our soil moisture for the spring season. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions. Again, you can type your questions into the question box. You can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Either one of those will work. So happy to take any questions. And there is my email as well if you just want to email me.
Yeah, and that too, another thing is that if you don't want to ask any of the questions here specifically, go ahead and always call the office too, and Megan would be happy to talk to you and give you a kind of a one-on-one interview as well. I know there's a lot of great information here, and so as you have time to think about it, you might go, oh, what was that? And Megan would be more than happy to talk to you afterwards as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're watching the questions box and looking for any hands, and I don't see any so far. One thing, I guess, Megan, to me, that really stood out is that let's say that we kind of continue on with a more or less mild approach to the start of winter. I know we've got the storm that you talked about coming up at us, but even if we get into like December and it's kind of like, oh, this winter hasn't been so bad so far, I think the thing that my key takeaway is keep watching, right? Because things could definitely turn at some point potentially. Not saying it will, but it might.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tricky thing with a La Nina is, having a strong favoring of a mild fall, and then at some point you have to transition more into the below normal temperatures favored. It's just kind of when that sets up, and we're getting into winter anyways. The average temperatures are dropping pretty quickly, but there is kind of always this turning point during a La Nina winter of like, oh, it's not been so bad. All of a sudden, it's a real North Dakota winter.
Awesome, thank you for that. And we're not seeing any questions or any hands raised, so we'll go ahead and give you another couple seconds here and see if anybody's got anything. But again, go ahead and stay up to date with everything. Weather.gov/biz. If you're on the eastern side of the state, just change those last 3 letters to FGF. So weather.gov/FGF, and that'll get you to their website. And again, Megan's always available for any questions you might have after the webinar here. Were you going to send anything out, Megan, after this by any chance? What were you thinking on that?
Yes, so I was going to send out the recording of this webinar. We have been recording it and we'll put it on our YouTube page, and we will email out the link to everyone who registered for this webinar. So that way you have all this information to reference in the future. And again, if you ever have any questions, as we got a question, can you please elaborate a bit more for details of this weekend's potential storm? Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, I think that the key on that one right now is that kind of what we know, we really, I think, presented up front. We definitely know there's going to be a storm system coming into the area here. It looks like it's going to potentially be wet, give us more rain potentially than we've had in quite some time, a couple of months for sure. I think there's still a lot of questions in regards to how much warm air and where the rain and snow may transition and those kind of things. So I would definitely encourage you to stay up to date on that one at our website, or again, feel free to call us 24/7. We got forecasters out there all the time that are just looking at the information, and they're always happy to answer any real specific questions that you might have as we get more information. Any other questions? I don't think I'm seeing more in the box and no hands raised. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and go ahead and end the webinar here. Again, thanks everybody for attending. Look for those emails from Megan about the slides and the recording. And yeah, feel free to share the recording with anybody that you think could benefit from seeing this. And we'll go ahead and keep an eye on, see how the winter goes.
Yep. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a great rest of your day.